Hello, and welcome again to Chile Talk. As always, you're with Neil Davidson and Pete Lee. I'm in Britain, and so I'm going to be talking to Pete. Hello, Pete.
Hello.
Who is in Chile, about his experience of inflation in the country. This is a pretty universal story, but it has its different wrinkles everywhere. So the first question is, Pete, I guess you've noticed that there's inflation.
Yes, well, inflation's been ticking up, I think, lots of places, but in Chile in particular, certainly since the beginning of 2022, probably the middle of 2021, a little earlier, we're now at year-on-year inflation of around 10%. Between 9 and 10%, so similar to Britain actually, and it's predicted to hit 12%, but who really knows how high it will go. Inflation, as we know, is a tax that public policy doesn't have control of. Public policy doesn't know where to put inflation.
That's right. Just as a quick background, Chile has had bouts of very high inflation in the past, as you can probably judge from the fact that, $1 is about 800 pesos, okay? And at one time a peso was a pound of gold, if I'm not mistaken, okay? So clearly at some point in the past there's been high inflation. But in the last quarter of a century, I just looked into it, whereas over the last quarter of a century, the dollar inflation has totaled, I think, about 75% over the whole period. Chilean peso inflation has been about 125%. So it's been higher than, say, dollar inflation, but it hasn't been that much higher. It's been basically what we would consider normal, right, Pete?
With some fairly rude economic growth, of course, from a low base over that period. Chile is an inflation success story, or was, really from the beginnings of the 1990s. It always had fairly jagged inflation in the history of the country, but got it under control to the point where they could schedule a goal of 2 to 4% inflation a year and pretty much keep to that goal. By comparison,
that's right.
The United States tries to keep to exactly under 2% inflation and does that pretty well generally.
That's right. As you've intimated there, Chile does have an inflation target, 2 to 4%, and an independent central bank. So to that extent, it's like, Britain, like the States, with slightly different inflation targets. Of course, one big difference is that in this current inflationary crisis, the Chilean central bank has been much more orthodox. It's actually kept interest rates positive, or maybe not quite positive, but I don't know exactly what they are at the moment. I think they're about 7-8%, the bank interest rate, and because of the funding crisis caused by the withdrawals from the pension funds, which the government allowed people to make in order as an alternative to having social welfare state, they allowed people to draw on their own pension fund savings. These pension fund savings were a very important source of capital for Chilean banks for their lending. So Chilean banks became starved of capital, with the result that whereas bank interest rates are 7-8%, the central bank interest rates, the interest you get on a savings account, on a deposit, is almost 10% now.
Wow.
So Chile is a very attractive country to save in. So it's a very orthodox monetary policy compared to Britain and the States, where interest rates are ludicrously below the rate of inflation, right?
Yes.
But this hasn't, well, it hasn't helped because the Chilean peso is still quite weak. You might expect foreign savings to flood in to take advantage of this, but it hasn't clearly happened to any great extent. And secondly, nor has it caused a recession so far, has it?
Yes, well, teetering on the edge of it. One thing you will notice about Chile is there's been a very forthright dollarization from people who have savings. I don't know exactly how many Chileans have savings. Could be 10%, could be 15%, but most people who have savings are putting those savings out of the country into international capital flows, putting it on.
Which seems very perverse, but to be getting, what, sort of probably less than 1% interest on dollar savings when they could be getting 10% interest in pesos. So that suggests a really dreadful lack of confidence in their currency and their government.
Yes, the confidence is at a tipping point. There's a sense that the inflation will never come back, and there'll be a Latin Americanization, to use the classic Argentinian phrase, a Latin Americanization of the Chilean economy, and we'll go back to the rocky inflation and the crazy correctives for it. There is an almost perfect storm of problems that the current government, the Boric government that's been in since March, has a promise to raise the minimum wage to 500,000 pesos a month, which is similar to 500 pounds, I think, still a little bit less, and is pushing up to 400, I think, this year. Now, the problem with that is not many people earn the minimum wage unless they're working in situations such as in the hospitality industry, where they also receive tips. Now, this is a problem for the hospitality industry because they have to pay more up front. They also have to charge more for tips because they automatically charge 10% more, making it much less attractive to diners. The things that they need to run, whether that's the utilities or the food to cook up in their restaurant, for example, are going up with inflation. It's not such an attractive proposition for even the upper middle class Chilean to dine out twice or three times a week anymore. So there are run-on effects.
So this is something contributing to inflation. So just to come back, having gone a little bit through the background, so you're seeing, obviously, well, it's like everywhere else, you're obviously noticing, I guess, things are going up in price.
Yes, and at the other end of the spectrum, among less well-off Chileans, well, for example, a kilo of flour, of plain flour, now costs slightly more than an hour of minimum wage labor. So that's pretty scary. If you work 44 hours a week and you get 44 kilos of flour, it's a grim situation.
Okay. So, well, what more can we say, really? Chile's dependent on, obviously, it imports all of its oil. It used to get its gas from Argentina, which has plenty of it, but that stopped, didn't it, when Argentina terminated unilaterally, I believe, the supply contract a few years ago. And Chile now imports liquefied natural gas, is that right?
Yes, there's importation of gas and, of course, very high prices for petrol. In the United States, they love complaining about gas prices, petrol prices, that is to say. And of course, their prices are ludicrously low to everybody else in the world. Well, in Chile, it's pricey to fill your car with gas.
Right. And it's a poor country, So that's it, really. I guess we can probably leave it there for inflation, but all the other dreary details about exactly what's going up and stuff is probably pretty much the same as anywhere else. But it's not a country that has a lot of kind of slack, in hand to cope with high inflation, unfortunately. And people are going to really feel it, just as they felt it, during the COVID crisis. Chile was actually fairly quick to put some government subsidies in place for the very poor and some, when they weren't allowed out to work. But, people really just have to tighten their belts. And now this. So we'll see. Recipe for social unrest. These are kind of things we'll have to touch on. I think, and your image is breaking up, so I think our internet connection is getting bad. So this is probably a good moment at which to end this episode. Okay, thank you for joining us.
Ciao.